of Jesus Parish in Woodbury, New York, there exists a thriving Knights of Columbus Council. These men are inspired, as is this whole community, by their council's namesake, Joseph Mario Reali. This is his remarkable story.
One weekend, the Knights were doing a membership drive, and me and a lot of other people kind of hurried our way into the church. And Joe came walking in, and he kind of had that smirk, like I knew he was up to something. And he says, I was with the guy from the Knights of Columbus. I said, what happened? He goes, I signed up. I said, are you sure you want to do that? They're going to call you. He goes, don't worry, I signed you up too. Thanks to Joe's yes to the Knights of Columbus, we have a council today. And so I wanted to say a few thank yous. First, thank you, Joe, for saying yes to the Knights.
I think it would be difficult for any father to describe their son in just a few lines. But doing that with Joe, it would just be impossible. He really was a larger-than-life kid. He more than inspired everyone he met, and that didn't matter who you were.
I would describe Joe as the most unique guy I've ever known in my life, as far as how charismatic he was, how genuine he was in everything that he did.
Joe lived his life like a football game. He really did. Every time he brought a soul to Christ, he scored a touchdown. That was his mission in life.
He took the best of authentic Roman Catholic spirituality and the best of society, and he really harmonized it into a whole.
He showed that you could do everything that a normal person does, but at the same time, your faith is totally driving your entire life.
Feeling pretty good?
Yeah, man, that was sick.
Yeah, you did good job.
There's something remarkable about this young man that has stayed with me. He's a young man that I have no problem recommending to other people to look to and to pray for and to pray to.
He was just a true inspiration to so many people on so many different levels.
We would pray before a big football game. He would paint crucifixes under his eyes for the football games. Joe would go to Mass almost every day. Confession at least once a month. The rosary was in his car. The rosary was in his pocket. Joe was a warrior for Christ.
Joe Reali was born on January 28, 1989, into an Italian-American family on New York's Long Island.
From the instant he was born, from the time I cut his umbilical cord, he exploded into life. With eyes wide open, he stared out the room, so much so that the doctor even exclaimed, he says, look at this kid. He said to the nurse, have you ever seen an infant with so much life? So much charisma, so much spirit.
Joe loved all aspects of his family's heritage and Italian cultural traditions, but he was most proud of an extraordinary family connection to St. Padre Pio. Joe's paternal grandmother hailed from Pietrelcina, the hometown of Padre Pio. Due to a health scare, she was told not to have any more children. But in 1952, she became pregnant again with Joe's father, Michael.
Doctor says, how could you do this? Now we have a serious situation. Her aunt in Pietrelcina was very close to Padre Pio, and Padre Pio immediately said, stop listening to the doctors, put your faith in God, pray the rosary. And so at that point, my mother said, you know what, I'm gonna just take a chance and try to have this baby. And the night of the birth, my aunt was in San Giovanni Rotondo praying, and Padre Pio was there. He became very distant, as if he bilocated, they say. And he came back and said, she had a baby, and his name was Michael.
For Joe, hearing stories about Padre Pio, the miracles he performed, his mystical gifts, his encounters with the spiritual realm, the guardian angels and the devil, all had a profound impact on Joe and instilled in him a deep sense of the reality of the Catholic faith.
We lived home with my parents, and my mother's from Petrolcina, and every time a priest would visit, we'd invite them to stay at our house. So when Joe was very young, he knew the importance of prayer and the rosary from a very young age. And he loved hearing stories about the saints. He loved talking about the saints.
It was through Padre Pio that Joe learned the value of the Mass, the importance of confession, adoration, praying the rosary. Joe was fortunate enough to meet some of the Capuchin priests who lived with Padre Pio, and they shared with him the stories of Padre Pio's bilocations, his ability to read souls. So that really authenticated the Catholic faith for Joe, and it really made it come alive and become real for him. Padre Pio has been a great intercessor for our family. Both my parents started the Padre Pio prayer group in the year 2000, and it helped them grow with spirituality.
The first time I really was amazed by Joe was we went to adoration during Holy Week. And he was only about 7 years old. And I remember him sitting in adoration and saying his rosary. He was just so still. He realized the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist.
Throughout his childhood, Joe was known for his charismatic personality and excelling in athletics. By the time he reached Syosset High School, he became a standout football player and everybody's friend, while always keeping the reality of the Catholic faith at the forefront of his life.
Joe was athletic, he was fun, he was energetic, he was the life of the party, and yet at his very core, everything about him was devoted to the church and her sacraments.
He had friends that were of all different races, religions. He didn't care where they were from. He brought kids to the church from his football team that were never Catholic, but invited them in anyway. It's like he treated everyone like they were Jesus.
He respected everybody because he saw Jesus Christ in everybody. And he was a very great friend of young people. Everybody liked Joe. I mean, he wasn't somebody people shied away from and say, oh, let me get away from that holy roller. But not like that at all.
I think that's like a big part of who Joe was. Like, you could keep your faith, the most important thing in your life, but you could also go out and have a great time. He loves having parties. Everything, he went all out, larger than life. Like, there was no limit to the amount of fun. You know, you could dance, you could talk, people get to know people. In high school, there was so many girls that loved Joe.
I mean, how do you go out all night with your friends, drive everyone home, and then go back and knock on their door the next morning to make sure they all go to Mass? These are the things that he did. Joe's actions as a Catholic young man got people to understand what they should be doing.
Joe was a natural, good-looking athlete that he could have, ran the town. And in a way he did, but he also knew who he was. I want to get to heaven, but I'm not there yet, Joe would say to me. I need to do a lot of work, Father. I need your prayers.
One day, it was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, and Joseph drives in and he fills the pew behind me with about 8 or 9 kids from the high school. And sure enough, what he had done was he went around to their houses and picked them up because they were Catholic and it was a holy day and they should be at Mass. And so he brought them all to church with us.
My son Michael told me on the Feast of Our Lady Guadalupe that he would go into the rooms and think the closet door was open, but he would push it closed and Joe would be kneeling in front of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
He was involved in a car accident, and the car that he was in actually flipped. And he told me was that as the car was flipping, he said to himself, "I'm glad I went to confession," because he thought he was going to die. And that blew me away. And I was happy that he went to confession and that he was in a state of grace.
Joe would go to confession as often as he could. I remember seeing him take a piece of paper out of his pocket, and I was like, what's this? Talk about an examination of conscience. Joe would write down each and every sin. Most of us, I think, try to forget about our sins, but Joe didn't want to miss a thing. When he would go to church, most of us would try to kind of pick the easy priest, one Hail Mary and you're out of there. But he would try to go to the more difficult priest or the fire and brimstone type priest. I think he really wanted to get the most out of it that he could. It's just the kind of person that he was.
When we had first started hanging out, I was not very religious. I would go to church with my mother maybe once a month, once every 2 months. So he would call me all the time. He would say, "Anthony, I'm outside your house. Get in the car, look decent, let's go, we're going to church." Like, it's 9 o'clock, you gotta go to church. So after a while though, it got to the point where I felt a lot more comfortable with, going to church. And then he gave me a restored confidence in my faith.
Oh, loved the game. He loved it. Everything was about football, 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 football all the time.
His work ethic was second to none. He had a motor like nobody else. He was a total team player. He wasn't, I want X amount of carries this game. I need more carries. I need to get more yards. Well, he always did the sign of the cross before each play. He's just very in tune with his faith.
I would walk through the locker room prior to a game, but I remember seeing him on his knees, blessing himself at times in silent prayer. His faith, was actually the foundation of who he was. He lived it. I never heard him say anything bad about someone. I never saw him lose his composure.
We'd be traveling with the football team in high school and in college, and he'd say to the coach, "Coach, I need to go to Mass." And he'd bring other players with him. If that's not evangelization, then what is?
Some of the best memories I have are playing football and Joe giving me a scapular or a rosary or anything just to keep under my pads.
You saw that he genuinely cared for the people that he interacted with daily. He was a man of virtue that kind of put everybody else first.
If there was one teammate eating by himself or, not really in with the crowd, Joe would be like, "Hey, come on over, come eat with us. Let's talk, like, what's going on?" He just brought everybody together.
Luciana and Eddie, I love you guys. I can't wait for the future. We got so many good times ahead. A lot of cute little kids you guys are gonna have. I love you guys. I wish you all the best.
After graduating Syosset High School in 2007, Joe was accepted into nearby CW Post to continue his football career. About to begin his junior year, he got a call from his sister Toni. Joe's mother, Lisa, had become seriously ill.
My mother found out she had stage 3 colon cancer, and I really didn't know what I was going to do. My husband and I just had our first child, Nicholas, and we lived close to my mom because she was really my son's primary caregiver when I was at work. And at the time, Joe was playing college football, which was, his favorite thing to do. And he said, "To, I'll help you. I'll take care of it." Like, I knew how much he loved football. I mean, he was a kid, he was in college. Like, those are the years that you are supposed to kind of be selfish. And he said, "No problem, I got this." And just like that, he just gave it up, and he never made me feel bad about it. He just had this ability to love and this ability to sacrifice. He would sacrifice anything for another person.
He loved football without a doubt, but he definitely knew, what took precedence. So he, stopped playing football and took care of, the family first.
After taking a break from football to support his family, Joe began a period of intense discernment. He felt a strong desire to serve Christ as a priest, while also being deeply attracted to the vocation of husband and father.
He had girls who wanted to go out with him, and he would refuse. He just didn't want to lead anybody on. He wanted to be very, very transparent especially with girls, young girls. When I meet a girl that I'm truly in love with, I'm going to take her out, and I'm going to marry her. That's how he looked at chastity.
He's 100% committed to chastity, and I think he wrestled with it, but at the same time, this is what he believed. So many times he would meet girls and they would want to sort of go there, and he had to disappoint them and say, "No, I'm waiting for marriage."
I think Joe knew that the hookup culture wouldn't bring him life, and so he strived to live that holiness. I'm convinced that Joseph is a model for all young men of how they're to live their lives, of responding to the call to holiness.
I mean, his whole life was built around Christ. My feeling was that he was going to go to the seminary and become a priest.
For a while, he did enter the seminary. He entered the college seminary, and he tried it out. And it was a struggle. It was tough. And I think Joe decided that it wasn't yet time for him, that he needed more time to discern. And so he took a leave from the seminary.
Joseph was always searching for his vocation. He was so conflicted between the priesthood or married life. He was so torn about what God was calling him to do.
Joe was a layman who inspires priests to be more priestly and to be more prayerful. He lived that just as a layman. And when we see lay people who take that upon themselves, that's extremely inspiring and enlivening for us and for me personally as a priest.
Joe always knew that his true home was with God in heaven. He even told many friends and family members of his intuition that his time on earth would not be long.
He always told me he's gonna die before he's 25. He told me it a lot.
He told me too that, he says, you know, Dad, I'm not gonna be around. Phew. I would shut him down. Joe was just an incredible athlete. The dedication, though, came with some battle scars from time to time. He was resting at home, recovering from ankle surgery, and no one really noticed anything abnormal. My wife was in the kitchen talking to him, turned her back, and then heard him gently collapse on the floor. He found out later that Joe had an enlarged heart. He died there in our home without any warning, just laid on the floor and closed his eyes.
The doctors say Joe died of an enlarged heart. You know, if loving too much could kill a person, you know, I would say that is the perfect description of Joe's heart condition. His love had no limits. His love for people had no limits.
The funeral was pretty much what I expected. There were thousands and thousands and thousands of people here, and it didn't surprise me at all because he gave his heart out to everybody.
We expected a big crowd. We have a big family, but there were thousands. I mean, people were waiting around the block to get in to see him. And that was when we were like, my goodness, hearing the stories. I mean, meeting people that we didn't even knew Joe, and just them telling us stories about, you know, their experiences with him. It was just remarkable for us.
A woman came up who I didn't even know and said that her son ran away to Florida. Joe went down there for some concert, but he met this boy and convinced him to go home to his mom. She tells her story like the prodigal son, that she thought she lost her son. And he came home telling her stories about Joe, about this amazing kid that told him, you know, that life is a challenge, whatever the story was, and that he had to go home and see his mother and then decide what the best thing in life to do.
The incredible response to Joe Reali's death and the stories and remembrances that began to flow in bore a remarkable similarity to the life of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati.
When I first learned about Pier Giorgio, that was what struck me. You know, as you heard, you know, he was Italian, good-looking. He knew how to have a perfect balance between having fun and being holy, and Pier Giorgio was the same way. And then also his zeal for helping others in charity work. Joe always made every person that he met feel like they had a beautiful dignity.
I think when we look to Pier Giorgio Frassati, we see a young man who was energetic, who loved life, and yet, again, who loved the church. You know, that great phrase, verso alto, ever upwards. Joe always wanted to reach for the heavens. And if, you know, I think that's exactly what Pier Giorgio Frassati was all about.
During his life, Joe struggled to determine his vocation, but in the days leading up to his death, he found peace in God's call.
Speaking to him the day before he died and back in the church. Joseph, you're making up your mind what you're going to do? Steve, I am. I know he was going to be a priest.
Right before he died, we were in the sacristy getting ready for Mass, and he said, "Father, I'm ready to go back. God wants me to be a priest, and I'm ready to respond."
Joe loved his faith so much, and he surprised us all when he said the priesthood was where he wanted to go. He did everything he possibly could to help out the church, and that was why he decided to join the Knights of Columbus. Joe's legacy lives on today through this council.
Knights of Columbus, 100%. Oh yeah. So he really loved this, noble warrior persona. Coupling that with the fact that his faith was so important to him, I think it's just, it was just like a natural fit for him. He fell in love with the idea of knights helping the church, and when I found out he was #1 on the list, I said, that's it. said, this is Joe, this is how we're gonna continue Joe's legacy.
When I heard that they started an Knights of Columbus at his parish, and then we were going to try to continue doing Joe's work, which was bring young people to the church, get them involved with the Knights of Columbus, and I said, I gotta be part of this.
Joe is exactly the kind of man that the Knights of Columbus proclaims their members to be. A family man, a man devoted to improving himself, a faithful son of the church. Joe is the model of everything that's good about the Knights of Columbus.
He had told my wife that, I hope one day I can touch the hearts of millions. And through the Knights of Columbus, he's getting his wish.
Since Joe died, all of his friends and so many people in our family have gone back to confession. They go to Mass now, and it's just amazing. People that haven't gone to confession in years are going because they know how important it was to Joe.
He impacts my faith because there are times I drift away from my faith, but always the reason I go back is Joe. I'm like, wow, man, I gotta get back to my faith. I gotta go to confession. Help me, Joe. And I end up going back.
I believe he's a saint. Of course, the church, the Holy Father decides that. But I believe absolutely and categorically Joe Reali is with Jesus Christ. He's with the Holy Trinity forever, no doubt about it.
Perhaps God had a purpose for him that's much bigger than we could ever even imagine, and I believe it was to intercede for many, because he's bringing so many people to God. Even people that have never met him hear his story and are going back to church, to the sacraments. It's incredible.